Hi there, everyone. This exercise deals with the airborne segment of session number 1. The ground segment is covered a bit earlier on in the module. The startup, power up procedure will be covered extensively in the ground segment of your training. So this exercise deals with the actual airborne segment. I'm going to take this exercise from an 80 knot call rolling down the runway. If you can just follow with me on my mouse cursor over here where exactly we are in this profile. What I have drawn up here on the screen at the moment is the Octet 1 Alpha departure out of Cape Town, runway 01. So if you want to have a look on your chart that was made available to you earlier on, the standard instrument departure, runway 01. Your clearance from air traffic control will sound something like this. It will read Simtrainer 1, you are cleared depart runway 01 Cape Town to comply with the Octet 1 Alpha, passing 2,000 feet, contact approach 119.7, and to squawk 1234 as an example. Now, the airborne exercise, as I mentioned, it deals with SOPs and utilizing the flight guidance system. So let's talk our way through this. The first call at about this point here on the not to vary scale chart that I've drawn here would be the call of 80 knots. Obviously that call comes from the pilot monitoring, and the response by the pilot flying is check. The next call, V1, and rotate. Don't forget at V1, guys, your hand, the captain's hand, comes off the thrust levers. All right. V1, rotate. The most important call, positive climb, not positive rate. We call positive climb, and obviously we're looking at the increase in altitude on the barometric altimeter. We're not looking at the IVSI. All right. The call is not positive rate; it's positive climb. All right. The next call, according to the SOP, 400 feet. All right. Cape Town's elevation is 150 feet. Therefore, 400 on 150 is 550. So at 550 feet, the pilot monitoring calls 400 feet. The pilot flying says heading. On that call for heading, the pilot monitoring will select heading, and confirmation needs to be made that the heading on your FMA has gone green. We will talk about this a lot as this exercise goes on. Whatever we see on the FMA, we call. It's relatively easy. If we see VRR in green, we call VRR green. If we see VRR white, we call VRR white. If we see heading in green, we call heading green. Colors are utilized a lot in the Embraer SOP, and we're following the Embraer SOP quite closely here. Okay, so 400 foot at about this point over here, the call is 400 foot heading. We select heading and we see heading green, so we announce heading green. Approaching 3DME next, or sorry, let's go back a bit further. 1,000 foot, which would be in Cape Town 1150. The call from the pilot monitoring is acceleration altitude. The response from the pilot flying is climb sequence, which is the indication for the pilot monitoring to go through the climb sequence. The climb sequence is quite simple. Guys, it looks like a Nike tick. It starts off with the flaps by raising the flaps to 0. Your hand goes across to the FADEC system where we select climb thrust. We then go up towards the top, we select speed mode, and then we adjust for 210 knots. If you look at that on your paper tiger, it's shaped a little bit like a Nike tick, just from ease of remembering that. So the climb sequence, flaps to 0, climb, speed mode, 210. Okay. We do not engage the autopilot below 1,000 foot. So once we're above 1,000 foot, the autopilot can be engaged. However, in this session, obviously we're trying to get used to the aircraft, so you'll probably be flying this aircraft manually at this stage. It is a very sensitive aircraft to fly, very sensitive in roll and sensitive in pitch as well. So bear that in mind. Don't over control the aircraft, otherwise it's going to be flying all over the place. Gentle on the controls, gentle movements. Alright, the next call, approaching 3DME. That can always be responded by check, and obviously that's good multi-crew management in the flight deck there as well, working together. The pilot monitoring obviously has more brain capacity available at this stage than the pilot flying. The pilot flying is doing his best to fly this aircraft accurately. So working together as a team in this session is vitally important. Approaching 3DME, check. Right, there's 3 miles, turning left 330. Alright, so the pilot monitoring at this stage can set 330. The plane will bank across to the left. And what do we need to do next? We need to intercept this radial 354. The departure says, straight ahead, 3 miles, turn left, 330, intercept radial 354, Charlie Tango Victor. Now, during the aircraft setup phase, radial 354 would have been set up on your course bar. So simply on this stage, when you've got to heading 330, we can call for nav. Alright, what do we expect to see when nav is selected? VRR white. Why VRR white? Well, it's armed and it has not captured yet. Okay, so we fly along. This happens all quite quickly. It'll be VRR white and then it turns quite quickly to VRR green. VRR green means it's been captured. Alright, so we wait for VRR green. Once we've got VRR green, we announce VRR green. The next call that will come from the pilot flying will be set heading to course. You'll hear and see that a lot during the training. Basically what that is doing, it's a high level of situational awareness that you've now, your lateral mode has been switched across to navigation. Therefore your heading cursor is not utilized at this stage. So bringing it in line with your course bar is quite important. Okay, now we're flying along on radial 354. We're waiting for 8DME. So again, the call can come. Approaching 8DME. Right 060. We can either call for right 060 or if the autopilot is engaged, the pilot flying can select heading 060. At this point on session 1, it'll be manual flying, so 060 will be set by the pilot monitoring. Okay. At this stage again, we'll start to think sources and courses. Right, what's the next thing to do? The next thing to do is to intercept radial 090 Romeo India Victor. Alright, be careful there, it's Romeo India Victor, not Charlie Tango Victor. What's the source? The source is 1176, the course 090. Now, important here that the pilot monitoring sets that up for the pilot flying before he does it for himself. Alright, so we set up the 1176 on the pilot flying side and then 1176 on the pilot monitoring side, making sure the correct radial is set up as well. Once the correct radial is set up, we can call for nav. What do we expect to see? VRR white followed by VRR green. Don't forget to announce these. VRR white, VRR green. The colors on the ERJ, the ERJ SOP utilizes colors quite a lot, and it's a nice system because whatever we see, we call. So just get used to whatever you see, you call. You see VRR and it's white, we call VRR white. If you see VRR and it's green, we call VRR green. When we're on this radial, the next thing we can call for again is set heading to course. Okay, set heading to course. Approaching 22 DME, the call can come, approaching 22 DME. The next part of this exercise is to fly to position octet. Now, if we had to utilize the FMS at this stage to route to octet, it's also quite simple. We of course are in the nav mode function at this stage. To go from nav mode utilizing a radial to go to nav mode utilizing the FMS, we are going to need to select heading first. So at this point here, if we wanted to get there utilizing the FMS, we would set heading, select FMS, and then go back to nav. That will take us to position octet, provided that is set up and we are going direct to position octet. Obviously, in session 1, the instructor will help you with routing to position octet on the FMS, but it is relatively simple. The instructor might even at this point say, right guys, turn right heading 150 to route to octet and not use the FMS at all on session number 1. Okay. This is quite a long segment from 22 DME up to position octet, so some spot exercises might be done, medium turns, steep turns, get the feel of the aircraft, possibly even some stall recoveries, whatever the instructor deems necessary for you to do. Obviously, the emphasis now, there's been a lot of selecting of heading mode, nav mode, speed mode, all that sort of stuff. So this is just to get you used to, like I mentioned earlier, the flight guidance system. All right. When we are down here towards position octet, the instructor will say, okay, guys or girls, let's route back to Charlie Tango Victor for a procedural ILS approach runway 01. All right. Before we route back to an airport, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, we've got to get the weather. Can't go back to Cape Town without having the weather. All right, so we get the weather from air traffic control. We also need to set the aircraft up for the approach and landing. That means figuring out our landing weight, setting up various speeds, and putting them in the MFD speed section on your instruments. Once that's done, we can brief and route back to Charlie Tango Victor. Now, the briefing is important, and I would encourage you just to review your briefing before the session starts, how you're going to brief, what you're going to brief, what it's going to sound like, and the order in which you do it. Okay. Now, important things to be covered in a briefing are the threats, your restrictions that you might have, and fuel that you will be landing with. We need to know how much fuel we have, so we know how much fuel we've got if we need to divert at any point. So fuel is vitally important. All right, and if we look at Cape Town, very hard terrain that we need to fly over at about this stage over here, and you've got Table Mountain sitting around here as well. So high terrain, you're on the coast, so birds are of course a threat. If the runway is wet, well, a wet runway could be a threat. If it was nighttime, a night landing could be a threat as well. Have a look at your briefing. It is quite rushed at this point. You're not too far away from Cape Town. In fact, you'll be precisely about 50 miles from Cape Town. So not a huge amount of time to brief before you can start the descent. With regards to starting the descent, we'll work in a 3-in-1 profile, meaning if we want to be overhead Charlie Tango Victor here at 3,000 feet, according to the approach chart, we'll need to start the descent at about 36 miles. If we're at level 150, most of these spot exercises will be done at level 150, so 12,000 foot to lose, 12 multiplied by 3 is 36. If you start the descent at 36 miles, it should work quite nicely. The way we descend, we will select speed, thrust back to idle, and then we'll adjust for 250 knots. That will put us in a nice profile in speed mode for the descent. Okay, at about 15 miles, we can reduce to 210 knots, simply reducing the speed to 210. Obviously, the nose of the aircraft will pitch up, the aircraft will slow down, and the vertical speed will also reduce. So you're looking at probably about 1,500 foot a minute at 210 knots. About 5 miles away from Charlie Tango Victor, we can reduce further to 180 knots, but to do that, we're going to need to select flap 9. So the call can come there, flap 9, speed 180, and the aircraft will slow down further. Overhead Charlie Tango Victor, at this stage, we should be ready for the approach. We'll call air traffic control, tell them we're overhead Charlie Tango Victor, and we're ready for the approach. As soon as the needles flick over, so we've routed over Charlie Tango Victor, we can count for about 3 seconds and fly outbound for 3 seconds, and then turn left onto heading 189 for that reciprocal track to route outbound. The chart says to route outbound to 9 DME and then a level turn inbound for the ILS approach. Okay, this is not a bad stage to review your go-around procedure. All right, if you didn't manage to cover it in your briefing earlier. And the review of the go-around procedure can sound something like this. You could say, in the event of a go-around, I'll announce going around, I'll click the toga button, advance the thrust levers to the max thrust detent. The aircraft will rotate into the bars or the cross pointers, whichever is selected, and I'll call for flap 9 with a positive climb. You call positive climb, I'll call for gear up. At 400 foot, you will announce 400 foot, and I'll call for heading. Something like that, just to review the procedure for yourself to help you have it correct in your mind. On this descent down to 2,000 feet, at approaching or anywhere from about 6 or 7 miles, if we select heading mode again, the aircraft will go into roll mode, so basically a wing leveler mode. Not a bad idea to do that, because that will allow us to set up the intercept heading for the inbound track into for the ILS. So by selecting heading again at this point over here, it will go into roll, of course then roll green, but we've got wing, the wings will be nice and level. All right, and we can then set up a heading of 040 for this ILS approach. Obviously, we're thinking again, sources and courses. What's the source? The source is Charlie Tango India 110.3. The course of 009 would be set up already, or should be set up already. And we've got our intercept heading of 040 degrees set up as well. At 9 DME, we can start this turn inbound. All right, and obviously, on the start of that turn inbound, we can arm the approach. When we arm the approach, we will see BC in white. That stands for back course white. So we see it, we must call it back course white. When we through 90 degrees of the inbound turn, the back course white will be removed, and we will see localizer glide slope white, meaning they are armed. When the localizer is alive, if the pilot monitoring sees that, the call will come, localizer alive. That will be followed by localizer green. The pilot flying will then call for set runway heading set. All right, what are we waiting for next? Of course, glide slope alive. At 1.5 dots, the pilot monitoring will call 1.5 dots. 1.5 dots meaning 1.5 dots on the glide slope indicator. 1.5 dots, gear down, flap 22, speed 140. To get your speed down to below 145 knots, we're going to need to come back pretty much to thrust idle. Below 145 knots, we can select flap 45 and call for our V approach speed. As an example here, we'll say V approach 133. So if I just go back a bit further here, let's start from localizer green, set runway heading, glide slope alive, check, 1.5 dots, gear down, flap 22, 140 knots. Come back to idle. At below 145 knots, flap 45, speed 133. At this point, everything happens quite quickly. What do we expect to see next? Glide slope green. On the call of glide slope green, the pilot flying can call for set missed approach altitude. Once that's done, we can do the before landing checklist. As you can see, it gets a bit rushed at this point, but as long as we know what to do next and what logic says is, once we've armed the approach, we will expect to have localizer glide slope white. We will get localizer green next, followed by the glide slope alive, followed by glide slope green. So it's a logical sequence of events that we will follow through. At this point, either a landing will be done, or the instructor might say, right, let's do a normal 2-engine go-round on the autopilot. A go-round on the ERJ, very, very simple exercise. toga buttons get clicked, thrust gets set to the max detent, the aircraft rotates nicely towards the flight director bars. Once it does that, or once it starts rotating towards the bars, we call for flap 9. Flap 9 we get, and we wait for positive climb, and then we select the gear up. Very, very simple, basic, and nice exercise to do. The instructor at that point will probably give you vectors back for another ILS approach on runway 01, or possibly a visual approach runway 01, depending on what he wants from you. It's a nice exercise, this session 1. A large emphasis, like I said, utilizing the flight guidance system, pressing the various modes. We use heading mode, nav mode, vertical speed mode, the approach mode, all in this exercise, and we use it quite frequently. So by the time you get down to position octet, you've pressed the flight guidance system a number of times. And then, of course, routing back to Cape Town, getting the weather, setting the aircraft up for the approach, and briefing is what you're going to need to do in all the sessions going forward. So it is a nice session. Like I said, Octet 1 Alpha, runway 01, have a look at it, get used to it. I wouldn't say memorize it, but you need to have an understanding of what to call for next. We need to know at 3 miles, we're turning left 330. On heading 330, we're selecting nav, so we can intercept radial 354. Approaching 8 DME, we need to go back on heading mode. We're turning right 060. We're then thinking sources and courses. Source 1176, course 090. Back onto nav mode. Intercepting this radial, waiting for 22 DME, then turning right to Octet, completing the exercises, and then routing back to Cape Town. I hope you're enjoying the course so far. If you have any questions on anything, please do not hesitate to contact me. All these documents will be made available to you before the actual course commences. Enjoy the rest of the exercise.